Welcome to the Talking Free podcast. As the girl who has always been told she talks too much, can speak with a mouthful of marbles underwater, and can sell ice to Eskimos, I have found the perfect platform to have my say, freely. I am here to share with real people, having raw conversations about authentic stories. It is a place where you can feel safe discussing anything and everything. These stories will make you laugh, cry, debate, wonder, intrigue, and get curious about life as you talk free with Trudy Marie. Please note that the following podcast may contain discussions or topics that could be triggering or distressing for some listeners. I aim to provide informative and supportive content, but understand that certain themes may evoke strong emotions or memories. If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed or in need of support while listening, I encourage you to pause the podcast and take a break. Remember that it is okay to prioritise your well-being and seek assistance from trained professionals. There is no shame in this. In fact, it is the first brave step to healing. If you require immediate support, please consider reaching out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or a crisis intervention service in your area. Thank you for listening, and please take care of yourself as you engage with the content of this podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Talking Free podcast. And today I am here with Ellee Picken, who is a holistic counsellor and has moved from Victoria to WA recently. And I met Ellee through an online business community. So welcome, Ellee.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
You're welcome. So we have a really interesting story to share today about identity shift. And I want to take you back to the last years of high school where your story really begins.
Yeah, so much like any young person looking for an identity outside of myself, not really knowing who I was. And I had this picture in my head of, if you have a boyfriend, like, you've made it, like you're worthy, you can take up space. And so I met my first boyfriend at the start of year 11. So I was 16. He was a bit older than I was, and my home life was pretty tumultuous back then. So it was a bit of an escape as well to just spend time with him and get out of the house. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had a boyfriend. So yeah, just tried to create this idea of what life looked like, and finished high school and went and studied, and yeah, it was all just like that searching, I guess, just that looking outside of myself to go, who am I in this world? Who can tell me who I am in this world, I guess.
Sure. And did you stay with that particular boyfriend?
Yeah, so we got engaged again. It was like that searching and going, well, you stay together and you get married. So the next step is to get engaged, and we bought a house together. I had quite a good career in that I was an Auslan interpreter, and everyone that I met and I told them what I did, they were like really interested because it's quite a different like job. And so again, it was just that external permission and like external confirmation of who I was. And everyone was so excited when I got engaged, and it was like just this, this big moment. But then again, it didn't fix anything. Everything went back to normal, and it still didn't fill that identity void that I was just searching for. And so then the next thing was getting married, and we had quite a long engagement. And I knew before we got married that it wasn't right. But when we met, there were so many things that had to come into play for it to happen. So we met at a train station. It was really random. All of these things kind of lined up, and I thought that was fate and it was our destiny to meet. And I was like, well, the universe has brought us together, so this is what I'm supposed to do. And we'd told everyone that we were getting married on a certain date, so that was what was going to happen, even though deep down I was like, I don't think this is quite right, but it's what I'm supposed to do. It's what the universe has lined up for me because I'm quite spiritual and I just, I guess, projected onto the situation that the universe had conspired for us to be together. So that was the plan and I had to just go along with it, if that makes sense.
100%. And did you think at any time before you actually went through with the wedding about not going through with it? Like actually calling it quits then?
I actually had a moment and I was working at a church at the time, interpreting at this church, and they were trying to encourage me to join the congregation, like personally. And I had this like I'd never voiced it to anyone, but I was like, if I join, God might ask me to not get married. And I can't not do that. Like, I can't not go through with this wedding. And so, as like bizarre as that sounds, it was just this deep down knowing, but ignoring it and pretending that it wasn't there and going, well, no, I have to. Like, I've committed to this. I'm very much like I was brought up. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. And so I thought that I'd made this commitment and I'd made this decision. So that was what I had to do. There was no going back on that.
Got it. And inside of that, is that part of your identity as well? Is that you were expected by society, as we all have these societal norms, that you've met somebody, you've got engaged, now you have to commit to the wedding?
Very much so. Like it was just that natural progression and that the ticking of boxes and thinking that, well, we've done this and the next thing on the list is to get married. And yeah, it just, again, because I didn't know who I was and I didn't have an identity outside of our relationship, there was no real space or even consideration for me to think of what a life where I chose not to get married could potentially be. Like, it just wasn't on the table. Even if I knew that it wasn't right, it wasn't on the table for me at all.
Okay. So, in summary, like, you basically looked successful on paper. You had been with your teenage partner, you had got engaged, you'd gotten married, you'd bought a house, you had a successful career. So everything was lining up how it should be, according to society. So what changed?
Well, we got married and again, like it didn't fix it. I didn't have like, yes, we had the beautiful day and everything was planned out as I wanted it. But then once that was done, it was like, okay, well, who am I now? Yes, I've got a husband, but it's not fixing anything. And so I started to then plan, well, we were going to have kids. And I thought that, well, if we have a big family and I become a mum and I, do like everything naturally. And I was just spent all of my time researching and I was studying to be a naturopath at the time and just thought that if I became a mum, then that would like fix it again. And so, and I even, it's embarrassing to say this, but I had planned out like to the month, probably the next 5 years of my life, mixing in study and having babies and what that would look like and when I wanted that to happen. And I was just white knuckling my future because I was just terrified because I didn't know who I was. I didn't have any trust in the universe. It was just, I had to control as much as I possibly could. And then I guess the catalyst for starting to question things and to start to bring some things to the surface was questioning my sexuality. And hindsight's 2020 and looking back I can see the kind of trail there, but it was only in that moment when I just started to see that I was attracted to some women and I was like, well, this is a bit odd. Like, I don't think these are normal friend feelings. I think there's something a bit more there, which is terrifying. Like, I was married and I was trying to live this tick box white picket fence life. And so I didn't tell anyone. I was like, well, I don't even know what this means. And yeah, just started to kind of percolate on it and like research on it. And explore what that meant. And at one point I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm bisexual, and I no longer identify with that. I identify as gay. But at the time I thought maybe I'm bisexual, and that can just be part of who I am, but I'll stay married because this is the life that I've got planned, and like I've got total control over it, and it's comfortable and it's secure, and this is just what my path is. And maybe I don't need to tell anyone. Maybe that's just there in the background. It is what it is. But I couldn't let it go. Like it was just, one of those things that just kind of like niggles at you, and you're like, it's still there. Like it's just pulling at me. I need to keep looking at this. It isn't settled.
At that stage, did you feel like you were potentially living a lie? Like you said that in your head you didn't identify being as bisexual, that you really had this thought that, no, I'm actually gay. Like, how was that playing out in your life?
It was, I mean, like, it's cognitive dissonance, right? I think is the term. And it's really hard to accept or admit to yourself that you're living a lie. Like, it doesn't come easily. And so it was trying to figure out, how do those two things coexist? I am married and I thought that that was what I wanted, but now I'm having these feelings. So what does that mean with them together? And so, yeah, realizing that there was some truth to the feelings, and there was some weight in that, and some identity kind of poking its head up through the surface going, hey, I'm here. It meant that I couldn't ignore it. And so, I reached out to a couple of close friends and just like shared with them that, hey, I think I'm attracted to women and I don't know what that means. I don't know what to do about it. And they were just super accepting, and each of them came from a different like walk of life. So they kind of gave me different perspectives of what that means. And it was then one of my friends encouraged me to see a holistic counsellor to talk it through and to explore what on earth was going on.
And how did your family and the rest of your wider network, because I know for a lot of people that are having these feelings, regardless of what age, whether you're young adulthood and starting to experience these, whether you're already married to a male, but I'm now attracted to females. Like, how was that experience of basically saying to everybody, this is who I am?
It was amazing, but it was a very slow process. So initially, like I told my mum before I separated from my husband, and I just was almost like giving her a heads up. And she was very accepting and just like, well, I love you no matter what. Like, I fully support you. My dad, I told after the separation, and he was fully supportive. His only concern was grandchildren. That was like his thing. It's just like, oh, well, still want grandkids. And I had a really good community in that I was dancing at the time. So I'd spent a fair bit of time with the dance community where there's a lot of particularly gay males in the space, and it just seemed to be really safe and accepting. And so that was, my safe place in the world to just be accepted no matter what.
Did you lose any friendships in that time? Like, were there people who just weren't accepting of it?
There was one particular one through the church. So a colleague at the church was part of the community and it's quite a traditional belief church, and she found it very hard. And even going into that conversation, I was terrified, and I was like, I already know what your response is going to be, but I need to tell you this. I need to, one, as a friend, and two, to speak my truth. This needs to be out on the table. And yeah, it was really hard, and there was no like real angst or animosity between us, but it still just wasn't the same, because we weren't on the same path of getting married and having babies and living the tick box life. So yeah, that was challenging.
I can understand, because especially coming from that kind of religious background where there are certain stigmas attached with certain ways of life, that it can add an awkwardness to it. But talking about awkwardness, what was it like for your husband?
Oh, so that conversation was and will probably remain to be one of the hardest things that I've ever done. And looking back, like I'm just so grateful for 25-year-old Ellie to have the courage to do that. But he was devastated. And I think, not only have I just destroyed the relationship that we had together, but the future that we were both working towards and, had both kind of been on the same page about until we weren't. But I think because I was so honest and just forthcoming with him, it meant that we were able to be amicable. Like it didn't blow up in a sense initially. Like, we still talked, we still hung out a little bit, and he was quite accepting, although he did out me to my siblings, which I hadn't told them because they were 12, 13 at the time. So trying to figure out how do I tell my siblings was, it was on the to-do list, but I hadn't quite gotten there. And then he had shared that the reason we'd split was because I was interested in women. But yeah, that relationship seemed to be okay until I started dating. And once he found out that, I think that kind of, was a tricky time. And so we didn't talk as much at that point.
Do you think that that's because it was like reality is now set in? Perhaps that he had his own cognitive dissonance that, yes, you've said this has happened. Yes, this is the reason for the breakup, but I don't need to deal with that. And then obviously seeing or hearing about you being with other women now, it's like, oh shit, this is actually real.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's one thing to play around with in your mind for it to be a concept or an idea, but when it is actual reality, and it just kind of came up in a casual conversation and I thought nothing of it because it had been a few months and I thought like he already knew that I was attracted to women, so I didn't think anything of it. And when I just mentioned that I'd started dating, and he just went dead silent, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe he wasn't the right person to tell at this exact moment, but here we are. Eventually the dust settled and we're okay now. It definitely was a bit of a roller coaster.
So are you still friends, or would you just say you're amicable?
We are amicable. We essentially grew up together, like became adults together. We were together from I was 16 to 25. So, and he was very ingrained in my family, my siblings being a lot younger, like he was a big brother to them. So he was still very much around and at family things and stuff like that for a while. And over time, that has just kind of dissipated. He has relocated and is doing his own thing. Like, I wished him a happy birthday, but that's pretty much it. If he calls, I pick up, but it's okay with we're, living our own lives now.
I totally get it. Being able to kind of just be in that space of, yeah, that was the time of our life we were together. It was obviously for a reason or a season, and now it's time to move on. So as you've moved on, what has life been like for you in this post-divorce era?
Oh my gosh, it feels like two lives. Like, pre-divorce and post-divorce, it just feels like different lifetimes. And initially there was like a lot of exploring. I was trying to figure out what my identity was without any of the labels and without any of the external stuff. So yeah, it was playing and practicing and meeting people and dating and going out dancing and finding things that I loved. And I spent a lot more time at the dance school and became a teacher, and that was something quite significant for me because he hadn't liked that I did dancing. He'd never watched me dance. He was like, I don't want to see you dancing with another man. The irony is not lost on me that, the guys that I danced with were gay, and then I also turned out to be gay. But playing in the possibility of who am I? And I moved out into a little one-bedroom apartment by myself and got to create an oasis there and got to I just created a whole new life that was right for me, that fit, that was my wild truth, I guess.
And what did you discover about yourself in that time? Because I know at the beginning you said that you had this identity very much based on social norms of get a boyfriend, then that meant getting engaged, then that meant getting married, and you were already planning babies and that type of thing. So who was this new Ellie? Like, what did she love and what did you discover about yourself?
It's really interesting, and something that I've reflected on is when you're gay or queer or whatever you identify with, that's not like heteronormative, there's not the expectations. Like, no one asks me about getting a partner. No one asks me if I'm going to get married again or when are we going to have children. Like, there's no external expectations, I think. And so it just is this whole different level of freedom to figure out what life looks like for me. And I think the biggest learning was, previously I had been so controlling over my future and like down to the month kind of thing. And then stepping out of that and going into like this sense of blackness, like I just couldn't see anything ahead of me. And now settling into, what do I want for my life? But then also really releasing it to the universe, because back then I would never have imagined or dreamed that I would be living in WA with a new partner, with a business. Like, it's completely different and so much better than I could have imagined for myself. And so I think that has been really freeing. Like, I love what I do and who I am, and I love to read and I love to do board games and like really nerdy things. I'll sit on the couch with a cup of tea and do crochet or just like the small stuff, and I can be okay in that. But I also have this really big faith in the universe has a plan, and it's so much more beautiful and true than I could plan for myself.
Awesome. So tell me about your new partner, and I believe her name is Linda, and what led you to move to WA?
So Linda and I met, we've been together about 18 months, and it was just so natural. Like, our first date was 6 hours and we just chatted. And I think all of the years that I have, done therapy and done work on myself all led to us being together. And we've both kind of said that if we had have met any earlier, we wouldn't be together because we just weren't at that place. And so now that we are, we've, just fallen into a beautiful, healthy relationship. And WA was never on the card. Like, I'd never envisioned that for myself, and neither had she. But it just came about, and we were both kind of done with Victoria and like, well, where's next for us? What's our next chapter look like? And both very trusting in the universe and put it out there. And a little holiday over here just showed us that it felt right, and this is our next chapter. So we went back and packed everything up, put everything in the car, and chucked the dogs in the back and drove across the Nullarbor, and here we are.
And how long ago did you move?
It's only been 3 months, which feels like, I don't know, it's weird. It doesn't feel like we're on the other side of the country because it just feels so natural. And I love living here, and I love our home, and I love the area, and I love the lifestyle. And I keep catching myself, and it's one thing that I'm working on at the moment is changing, how do I put this? Changing the standard for my life. So like raising the bar, being like, okay, it's okay to have an epic life. Like, I look at where I'm living, I go, oh my God, this feels like I'm on holiday. And so it's changing that narrative and being like, well, no, this gets to be my life. This is the new level of normal, because it just is so right. Like, if that makes any sense, you kind of get used to the struggle. And so being like, no, I'm releasing that and I'm stepping into a new reality. And it's one thing to want those things, but it's a whole other thing to get what you want. And so it's adapting to having what I wanted, essentially.
And I suppose part of that is changing careers as well, because you said earlier on when you were with your husband that you were an Auslan interpreter, but you're now a holistic counsellor. So tell me how that came about.
It was, I hate to say it, but it was the pandemic. And it was, again, one of those defining moments of, well, church got shut down during lockdowns. So that kind of just naturally ended that career. And I was okay with that. I'd been looking for ways to step back from that work. And every time I did, because I was like, well, I'm very comfortable with my sexuality. Why am I still working at a church? Like, I just don't understand it. And came to realize that its purpose was to help me to really cement those values and that identity and to be able to stand strong when everyone else around me was disagreeing and had different opinions. So once I'd kind of achieved that, the universe was like, okay, well, that's done now. And there was a messy middle of not knowing what I wanted to do. And I was like, well, it's not this, but I don't know what's next. And just giving it some space and some intention, a little seed of an idea dropped in of creating a spiritual wellness business, which I did. And then as I, kind of got the wheels in motion for that, the inspiration to study holistic counseling came in, and it's never what I planned. Like, I didn't think that, oh yeah, this is what I want to do next. But it was the reflection of the holistic counselor that I worked with had such a profound impact on my life, on my ability to make the decision that I did, on my ability to explore my identity. And, she was the first person that really said, it's okay to change your mind. And so just reflecting on that experience, I was like, well, I want to be able to offer that to others. I want to bring people into my space and really see them and really hear them, and to, give them permission if that's what they're seeking, or to give them guidance, or to just witness their soul and their experience. And yeah, it all kind of unfolded organically and in divine timing. And I am so grateful because I just love it.
And that's so nice to hear. And I think even reflecting back to, like you said, that person helped you to discover your true identity, and now going into that field where you get to then give back and pay it forward and help other people potentially find their true identity no matter what they're going through. Because let's be real, as human beings, we all have our shit to deal with, and it just takes on various forms of what it is. But you being able to give back to the community, I think that's amazing.
Yeah, again, it's one of those things that wasn't planned, but the universe had a beautiful, grander plan than I could. And to have done the work to get to where I am and to be really solid in my identity, it just feels right to then be able to walk alongside others as they, go through a similar journey, whether obviously it's not going to be the exact same as mine, but, just that same essence of exploring yourself and discovering the truth that's kind of poking up through the surface, going, hey, like, I'm here, look at me, there's something to explore here.
And I think that can be said for anybody in the community, is that we all have these things, whether it's our sexuality, whether it's a career change, whether it's something that defines us in one way or another, being a parent or not being a parent. We all have these ways of dealing with things. And like you said, you can either ignore it and pretend it's going to go away on its own, or you can fully lean in and start to explore that new reality that might be possible.
Absolutely. And I think that the longer that we ignore it, the more that we will get forced to deal with it by life. And that often ends up being a kind of crossroads, like a defining moment of we have to really choose which path we're going to take. And so that's the people that I love to work with, is just when, you know, when you're feeling stuck and you know that there's a choice to be made, but it's like, what is the right one? I have no idea, but I need to choose, essentially.
Yeah. And your business is predominantly online because that's the space you've been working in, especially with the move. But I believe you've now found somewhere new to work here within the Perth region.
Yes. I'm so excited. Originally, when I set up the business, I was in my little one-bedroom apartment and it was always going to be an online service. And I've loved working with people in that capacity. I've worked with people, you know, from different states, and that's amazing to be able to connect. But there was a little part of me that knew when I moved here, the next kind of step and the next of evolution of my business would be to see people in person, to create a beautiful, nourishing, nurturing space to come in and just be held and to be guided. And so, yeah, I found a beautiful little room in Mandurah, not too far from me. And so, yeah, I'm really excited that that's going to be where we're headed next.
And that's awesome for you. And I think that other listeners will be able to, you know, if they want to reach out and potentially are going through some of the same identity shifts that you've been through, is that I will link your website into the show notes. So any listener who does want to reach out and connect and discuss their own journey with you, that will be possible.
Yeah, amazing. I am always happy to connect with like-minded souls, ones that are, you know, a little bit spiritually inclined, like myself. And yeah, I just think that there's so much that can come from connection.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And it's such a vulnerable share because, you know, going through such an identity change like that and actually having the reflection to go, this is what happened and that's okay. And this is how my life gets to be now, I think is an incredible journey of self-reflection. So thank you for sharing that with my listeners.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's one of those things that it no longer defines me, and so the people that I meet don't really know my history because it's not relevant anymore. I feel very grateful to be able to share because it is absolutely, it is my story. It is part of my history. It's the reason that I am here now. So to be able to acknowledge that whilst being in this space, it just feels like a beautiful, I don't know the word, like a comprehensive, like it just a beautiful recognition of where I was and where I'm at now, and to really honor that younger me for the decision that she made.
Thank you. And I'll finish off today by asking you, what are you grateful for today?
Oh, everything. I am grateful for the magnificent sunrise that we had in WA this morning. It was just beautiful, and I am very grateful for this conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to the Talking Free podcast today. If you have an idea for a future episode or a story you'd like to share, then please message me, as I am always up for real, raw, and authentic conversations. If you love what you are hearing, then please be sure to subscribe to hear all the latest episodes, and spread the word to your family, friends, and colleagues so they too can listen in. If you are sharing on social media, then please be sure to tag me at _Trudy _Marie _ so I can personally acknowledge you. I am always open to comment about how these episodes have resonated with you. It would also mean the world to me if you were to leave a 5-star review to ensure the Talking Free podcast is heard by more listeners around the world. And remember, lead with love as you live this one wild and precious life.